You win! Perfect!
With the fashionably late update, 4 new abilities were added into Die of Death, those being Pie, Flashlight, Bugle, and Reroll. And I have to say that the civilian ability reworks this update are a lot more consistently balanced than the new abilities. Pretty much all of these new abilities have been very divisive on whether or not they're strong or weak. But one of these new abilities stands out to me more compared to the others because of how unbelievably weak it is. And that ability is Flashlight. I don't think this is the weakest ability in the game because I've already made a video covering Noisemaker Bugle, but I do think it's very close to being the weakest. So what does Flashlight do and how exactly does it work? Flashlight is a support ability that can slow down and inflict the killer with the Dazed status effect. Upon activating this ability, the user pulls out a flashlight and turns it on for 2.65 seconds after a 0.35 second windup. While the user is holding out their flashlight, they're unable to sprint and receive a speed boost of 2. The light comes out in front of the user in a cone shape, with a range of 26 studs, which slowly shrinks before running out, and it slows down the killer by 0.3 for every 0.125 seconds they're inside the cone of light. If the killer is slowed for 10 ticks while not having stun immunity, they're inflicted with Dazed for a total of 15 seconds and take 5 damage, while the user heals 10 HP and receives a speed boost of 6 for 2 seconds. If Flashlight ends without flashing, the user can't sprint and gets slowed by 4 for 0.5 seconds. This ability also has a cooldown of 35 seconds, and it gives you 12 points and 0.1 killer chance upon dazing the killer. It's also important to mention that this ability can go through walls, but as I'll explain in this video, that won't help you all too much with how meaningless the effects of this ability really are. Now, before I get into all of the negative things I have to say about this ability, let's look at some of the upsides of Flashlight. First, I must say that Flashlight is really easy to land. The cone of light is so big initially that it can block off several spots on almost all of the maps entirely, and even when the cone shrinks, aiming it is still really easy. The self-heal and speed boost you get after dazing the killer are also very helpful. The self-heal only heals you for 10 HP, which may not seem like a lot, but that does allow you to tank another M1 no matter which killer it is. This ability is very risky and leaves you extremely vulnerable, as you get absolutely no damage reduction while you have the flashlight out, and you can't manually turn it off when you know you'll miss or get hit by a projectile. So the self-heal and speed boost are absolute necessities, and you need to use them to their full potential when you successfully daze the killer. All things considered, this ability is really good for stalling out the round at the very last second to save a teammate that's low on health. That's where the upsides of this ability end though, so now let's get into the many downsides of choosing this ability. First of all, the slowdown this ability gives the killer is so negligible it's insane. Now yes, it is a pretty big amount of slowdown that basically forces the killer to stop sprinting for a brief moment, but the problem is that it goes away so quickly that it hardly even affects the killer. The slowdown is so short-lived that it basically does nothing but force the killer to regain stamina for a split second, which depending on the scenario can have varying levels of effectiveness. Second of all, as I said earlier, you literally have no damage reduction while using this ability. This means that you are incredibly vulnerable while you have your flashlight out, especially if the killer in question has a projectile available at that moment, which they most likely will. Pursuer has Howl, and Harken has Agitation, both of which have really short cooldowns. Artful can use Repurposed Implement, which isn't as readily available as often as Howl and Agitation are, but it can still pack a heavy punch considering it ragdolls anybody it hits. Don't even dream about using this ability on Killdroid for obvious reasons. Not only is his M1 ranged, but he also has Propel, which is basically unavoidable when you can only move so quickly while using this ability. And it doesn't even have to be a projectile necessarily. Badware can charge right into you with Bolt as well. And third of all, Dazed is a really stupid status effect that does almost nothing. Sure, it may last for 15 whole seconds and allow allow for longer stuns, but the problem is that the killer will most likely expect civilians to attempt to stun them while they're dazed. I also want to add that a 25% increase in stun time and ragdoll time is almost nothing in the grand scheme of things. Sure, it can have some kind of effect on the killer, but most of the time you won't even really notice a difference as a civilian and as the killer. For example, stunning the killer with a revolver will normally stun them for 2 seconds, but with the dazed status effect they'll be stunned for 2.5 seconds, which is barely an increase when the killer will most likely be able to avoid any and all stuns while they're dazed. Not only is Flashlight just a really weak ability, it also makes almost no sense from a conceptual level as well. There are many routes you could take to rebalance or rework this ability, so I'll just talk about how I personally would rework this ability. Dazed is a really weird status effect that doesn't really fit into this game, and most people in public lobbies don't even realize what it does because of how unintuitive it is. Sure, Sentinel abilities may have their icons flash yellow while the killer's dazed, but that's kind of hard to notice when you're focusing on what's actually happening and not your ability icons. And like I said earlier, the killer will most likely be a lot more cautious about stuns while they're dazed because they know they'll suffer increased stun durations. This status effect can also just do nothing if you're by yourself and your second ability isn't a Sentinel ability. Dazing the killer fundamentally takes way too much coordination with your team on a platform where communication is very limited. And I find it really funny that the Flashlight ability doesn't blind the killer at all. Yes, you heard that right. This ability literally does nothing to the killer's vision for some reason. So I think that they should drop the concept of extended stuns and instead focus on this ability blinding the killer, because it only makes sense for a Flashlight to be based around visual impairment. There's literally a blindness status effect currently in the game, but it's exclusive to private servers. Why didn't they make Flashlight give the status effect if it's fully programmed? Flashlight also has another major issue, and that's the fact that the best way to counter it is by just running directly at the user if you don't have a projectile off cooldown. Trying to avoid the cone of light will do nothing but waste your time because there's almost no end lag when you don't daze the killer with your Flashlight. So trying to punish a Flashlight user for missing isn't a good strategy at all. And again, every killer has some kind of ability that completely counters Flashlight, and the Flashlight user can't do anything about it. I think the best way to remedy this problem is by making Flashlight have more end lag, but the user can turn it off whenever they like. This makes it to where if the user knows they're not going to daze the killer, or if they know they're gonna get hit by a projectile, they can just cancel out the ability to hopefully avoid the damage. The extra end lag would also make it to where punishing Flashlight users for missing is an actually viable strategy for the killer, so they won't have to run right at them when they don't have a ranged ability available. All in all, I do like the concept of a Flashlight ability, but the Die of Death developers completely dropped the ball when designing this ability. Flashlight is overall just way too weak, the slowness barely does anything, it leaves you incredibly vulnerable, and the dazed status effect does practically nothing, especially since an experienced killer that knows how the status effect works will be able to predict every stun headed their way. I just find it incredibly strange that they didn't make the Flashlight ability of all things blind the killer in any kind of way, even though that's a status effect that's fully programmed into the game already. This ability needs to be stronger, and it needs to be reworked in some kind of way. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and goodbye.